red glove, snow falling, and a detective who follows the trail to a woman the world forgot. But what if she was never meant to be found? What if this glove is the beginning of a truth too dangerous to speak? Thank you so much for watching and for all your comments. Let me know at the end if you like the story and where you're watching from and why you're following this. The winter of 1897 descended upon Boston with a fury that even the oldest residents could scarcely recall. Snow fell in thick, relentless curtains, transforming the cobblestone streets into treacherous pathways of ice and shadow. Gas lamps flickered weakly against the storm, their amber glow barely penetrating the white veil that shrouded the city. It was on such a night, when decent folk huddled beside their fireplaces and spoke in hushed tones of the bitter cold, that Detective Jonathan Reid found himself standing before a scene that would alter the course of his carefully ordered life. Jonathan was a man of 32 years, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that he kept meticulously combed, despite the wind's best efforts to dishevel it. His gray eyes, sharp and observant, missed little in the world around him. He had built his reputation on logic, on the careful assembly of facts into irrefutable conclusions. The Boston Police Department valued him for his methodical approach, his unwavering dedication to truth. Yet tonight, as he stared down at the single red glove half buried in pristine snow, he felt the first tremor of something that defied his rational mind. The glove lay in an alley between two brick buildings on Beacon Hill, discovered by a night watchman making his rounds. It was a woman's glove, unmistakably elegant, made of the finest red kid leather with delicate pearl buttons at the wrist. The crimson color seemed to pulse against the snow like a beating heart, impossible to ignore. Jonathan crouched beside it, careful not to disturb the surrounding area. The snow had fallen heavily since evening, yet this glove appeared recently placed, as though someone had dropped it mere minutes before. "Strange business this," remarked Officer Thomas Brennan, a stocky man with a weathered face and kind blue eyes. He had been with the department for 20 years and had seen his share of peculiarities. "Just a glove, though. Could belong to anyone." Jonathan lifted the glove carefully, turning it over in his gloved hands. The craftsmanship was exceptional, the sort of accessory worn only by women of considerable means. Inside, embroidered in golden thread so fine it was almost invisible, he found two initials, E.H. "Not just anyone," Jonathan murmured. "Someone wealthy enough to afford such quality, and these initials might lead us to the owner. If there's a crime to investigate," Thomas said reasonably. "A lost glove isn't exactly a matter for detectives, Jonathan." But Jonathan's instincts, honed by years of investigation, whispered otherwise. The placement seemed deliberate, the timing suspicious. And there was something else, something he couldn't quite articulate, that made his pulse quicken with anticipation. He slipped the glove into an evidence bag and stood, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. "I want to know who this belongs to," he said firmly. "Tomorrow I'll begin inquiries among the merchants who sell such items. Someone will recognize this work." Thomas shrugged, accustomed to his colleague's thoroughness. "As you wish. Though I suspect you'll find it belongs to some society lady who lost it during her evening constitutional." Jonathan said nothing, but as he walked back through the snow-laden streets toward his modest apartment on Charles Street, he found himself unable to dismiss the glove from his thoughts. That night, he lay awake listening to the wind howl against his windows, the red glove resting on his desk like a question waiting to be answered. The following morning dawned clear and painfully bright, the sun reflecting off fresh snow with blinding intensity. Jonathan breakfasted on coffee and toast, then set out to visit the finest haberdasheries and glove makers in Boston. His first 3 stops yielded nothing. The proprietors examined the glove with professional interest but could not identify its maker. It was at his 4th stop, a small but prestigious establishment on Newbury Street, that he finally found answers. The shop belonged to Monsieur Philippe Dubois, a French immigrant who had brought his considerable talents to Boston 15 years prior. The elderly gentleman took the glove in his thin, careful hands and studied it with the intensity of a scholar examining ancient manuscripts. His eyes, magnified behind thick spectacles, widened slightly. "Ah, yes," he said softly, his accent still pronounced despite his years in America. "This is my work. I remember it well. A commission from 2 years ago, a very specific request." Jonathan leaned forward, his heart beating faster. "Can you tell me who commissioned it?" Monsieur Dubois hesitated, his professional discretion warring with his civic duty. Finally, he nodded slowly. The gentleman who ordered these gloves, they were a pair, you understand, paid handsomely, and requested the utmost secrecy. But I suppose if you are investigating a crime, I must assist. The gloves were commissioned by Mr. Edmund Hartwell, one of Boston's most prominent shipping merchants. He requested them as a gift, I believe. For whom? Jonathan asked, though he suspected the initials might match the recipient. He did not say, but he specified the initials E.H. I assumed perhaps for a relative, a sister or a niece. Mr. Hartwell was very particular about every detail, the color, the buttons, even the stitching pattern. He said they must be perfect, absolutely perfect. Jonathan thanked the glove-maker and stepped back into the cold morning air, his mind working rapidly. Edmund Hartwell was indeed well known in Boston, a wealthy widower who had built a shipping empire through shrewd business acumen and, some whispered, ruthless tactics. He lived in a mansion on Commonwealth Avenue, surrounded by servants and the trappings of his success. But why would one of his expensive gloves appear in an alley on Beacon Hill? And who was E.H.? He decided to approach the matter carefully. That afternoon, he presented himself at the Hartwell mansion, the imposing three-story building of red brick and white trim. A butler, impeccably dressed and coldly efficient, answered the door. "I am Detective Jonathan Reid of the Boston Police Department," Jonathan said, presenting his credentials. "I wish to speak with Mr. Hartwell on a matter of some importance." The butler's expression remained impassive. "Mr. Hartwell is not receiving visitors today. If you would care to leave your card, I shall inform him of your visit. This concerns a piece of property that may belong to him," Jonathan persisted. "A red glove, found in unusual circumstances." For just a moment, something flickered in the butler's eyes. Surprise? Fear? It vanished so quickly Jonathan almost doubted he had seen it. "I shall inquire if Mr. Hartwell is available. Please wait here." Jonathan stood in the grand foyer, studying the oil paintings that adorned the walls, the marble floors, the crystal chandelier that sparkled overhead. Everything spoke of wealth and taste, of a man who commanded respect and power. Yet the house felt cold, not merely from the winter chill, but from some deeper absence of warmth. The butler returned after several minutes. "Mr. Hartwell will see you in his study. Follow me, please." Edmund Hartwell was a man in his late 50s, with silver hair and a neatly trimmed beard. He sat behind a massive mahogany desk, his posture erect, his dark eyes assessing Jonathan with the calculating gaze of a man accustomed to measuring opponents. He did not rise or offer his hand. "Detective Reid," he said, his voice deep and controlled. "My butler mentioned something about a glove. I cannot imagine how such a trivial matter warrants police attention." Jonathan withdrew the evidence bag containing the red glove and placed it on the desk. "This was found yesterday evening in an alley on Beacon Hill. The maker identified it as one of a pair you commissioned 2 years ago. I would like to know to whom you gave these gloves and why one of them might have appeared in such a location." Hartwell's expression remained neutral, but Jonathan noticed his fingers tighten almost imperceptibly on the arms of his chair. "You are mistaken, Detective. I have never commissioned red gloves. Monsieur Dubois must be confused." "He was quite certain, sir. He remembered the commission in detail." "Then his memory deceives him," Hartwell said flatly. "I suggest you stop wasting my time and your own with such nonsense. A lost glove is hardly a police matter." Jonathan studied the man carefully. Every instinct told him Hartwell was lying, but without additional evidence, he had no grounds to press further. "Very well, Mr. Hartwell. But if you should recall anything about these gloves, I trust you will contact me immediately." "Of course," Hartwell said dismissively, reaching for papers on his desk in clear dismissal. As Jonathan made his way back through the mansion, he became aware of a presence watching him from the second-floor landing. He glanced up and caught a glimpse of a young woman, perhaps 25 years of age, with auburn hair and striking green eyes. She wore a simple gray dress, far too plain for this opulent household, and her expression held such profound sadness that Jonathan felt his breath catch. For a moment, their eyes met, and he saw in hers a desperate plea, a silent cry for help that needed no words. Then she was gone, disappearing into the shadows of the upper hallway like a ghost. "Who was that?" Jonathan asked the butler. "I saw no one, Detective," the man replied stiffly, opening the front door. "Good day." Outside, Jonathan stood on the mansion's steps, his mind reeling. The woman's face haunted him, those green eyes filled with such anguish. He knew with absolute certainty that she was connected to the red glove, to whatever mystery was unfolding. But who was she? Why did she seem a prisoner in that grand house? He returned to the police station determined to investigate further. Throughout the afternoon, he made discreet inquiries among his contacts, asking about Edmund Hartwell's household. What he learned troubled him deeply. Hartwell employed a staff of 12 servants, all loyal and well paid. He entertained frequently, hosting Boston's elite at lavish dinners and parties. Yet no one could recall seeing a young woman with auburn hair in his company. "Hartwell's been a widower for 15 years, said Captain George Harrison, Jonathan's superior, when asked. His wife died in childbirth, along with the baby. Tragic business. Since then, he's lived alone except for his servants." Why this sudden interest in Hartwell? Jonathan explained about the glove, though he found himself reluctant to mention the woman he had glimpsed. Something told him to keep that detail private, at least for now. Harrison frowned thoughtfully. "A glove isn't much to go on, Jonathan, and Hartwell is a powerful man with connections throughout the city. Be careful about making accusations without solid evidence." "I'm not making accusations, sir. I'm simply following a lead." "See that it remains that way," Harrison warned. "The last thing this department needs is trouble with someone of Hartwell's standing." That evening, as darkness fell and fresh snow began to drift down from heavy clouds, Jonathan found himself walking past the Hartwell mansion once more. He told himself he was simply being thorough, observing the household's routines. But truthfully, he hoped for another glimpse of the mysterious woman. The house blazed with light, and through the windows he could see servants moving about their duties. But of the auburn-haired woman, there was no sign. He was about to turn away when movement at a third-floor window caught his attention. A pale hand pressed against the glass, and for just a moment he saw her face again, looking down at him with those heartbreaking green eyes. Then a curtain was drawn sharply across the window, cutting off his view. Jonathan's jaw tightened with determination. Something was terribly wrong in that house. Some secret that Edmund Hartwell guarded jealously. And that woman, whoever she was, needed help. The red glove had led him here, had opened a door to a mystery that grew more compelling with each passing hour. He would find the truth, no matter how long it took or what obstacles stood in his way. He would discover who the woman was and why she remained hidden from the world. And perhaps in solving this mystery, he would find something he had not known he was searching for. Something that had nothing to do with detective work and everything to do with the sudden, unexpected stirring of his carefully guarded heart. The days following Jonathan's encounter at the Hartwell mansion were consumed by investigation and growing obsession. He could not banish the image of those green eyes from his mind, nor could he shake the conviction that the woman was in some form of captivity. Yet without concrete evidence of wrongdoing, his hands were tied. Edmund Hartwell was too powerful, too well connected to confront without irrefutable proof. Jonathan returned to Monsieur Dubois and pressed him for more details about the glove commission. The elderly craftsman, sensing the detective's earnestness, revealed what he remembered of that transaction 2 years prior. "Mr. Hartwell came to my shop on a December afternoon," Monsieur Dubois recalled, his wrinkled hands folded carefully on his workbench. He was very agitated, not his usual composed self. He insisted the gloves must be ready within a week, though such quality work typically requires a month. He said they were for someone very special, someone who deserved only the finest things. There was something in his voice, detective, something almost desperate. I wondered at the time if perhaps he had found love again after his wife's death. "Did he mention a name?" Jonathan asked urgently. "No, but he was quite specific about the shade of red. He brought a ribbon with him, said the color must match exactly. It was unusual, a very particular crimson, like fresh rose petals. He said it was her favorite color." Jonathan felt his pulse quicken. "And you made 2 gloves as a pair?" "Of course. Gloves are always sold in pairs, detective. But now that you mention it, Mr. Hartwell only took 1 glove when he returned to collect them. He said the other would be retrieved later, but he never came back for it. I still have it here, in my storage." "May I see it?" Jonathan asked, struggling to keep the excitement from his voice. Monsieur Dubois disappeared into his back room and emerged moments later with a wooden box. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, lay the companion to the glove found in the snow. It was identical in every way, the same exquisite craftsmanship, the same pearl buttons, The same embroidered initials, E.H. Jonathan studied the glove carefully, his detective's mind working through possibilities. Monsieur Dubois, I would like to purchase this glove from you. Name your price. The old man shook his head. Take it, detective. If it helps you in your investigation, that is payment enough. I have always believed that beautiful things should not be separated from those who love them. These gloves were made with care and affection. They deserve to be reunited. Jonathan thanked him profusely and left the shop with the second glove carefully wrapped. Now he possessed both gloves, but more importantly, he had confirmation that Edmund Hartwell had lied about commissioning them. The question remained, who was E.H., and why was Hartwell so determined to conceal her existence? That evening, Jonathan sat in his apartment, the two red gloves laid out before him on his desk. Gaslight flickered across them, making the crimson leather seem alive. He thought about the woman in the window, tried to recall every detail of her face. She had been beautiful, undeniably so, but it was the sadness in her eyes that haunted him. What kept her imprisoned in that mansion? Was she there willingly, or was she held against her will? He knew he needed more information, but approaching Hartwell's servants directly would be futile. They were loyal, well compensated, and unlikely to betray their employer. He needed another approach, something more subtle. The answer came to him 3 days later, quite by accident. He was interviewing witnesses about an unrelated burglary when one of them, a laundress named Mrs. O'Brien, mentioned that she occasionally did work for some of the grand houses on Commonwealth Avenue. "Do you work for the Hartwell household?" Jonathan asked casually. "Not anymore," she said, her Irish accent thick and melodious. "I did for a time, about 6 months back, but I was let go rather suddenly. No explanation, just told my services were no longer needed." Jonathan leaned forward with interest. "Did anything unusual happen before you were dismissed?" Mrs. O'Brien hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "I shouldn't gossip about my betters, detective." "This isn't gossip, Mrs. O'Brien. This is a police investigation. Anything you tell me will be held in strictest confidence." She studied his face, seemed to find something trustworthy there, and nodded slowly. "There was a room on the 3rd floor, always kept locked. We weren't allowed to go near it, but one day I was cleaning the hallway, and the door was slightly ajar. I heard someone crying inside, a woman's voice. I knocked, asked if anyone needed help, but the door was pulled shut immediately. The next day I was dismissed." Jonathan's heart hammered in his chest. "Did you see who was inside the room?" "No, but I heard Mr. Hartwell speaking to someone in there later that same day. He said something about keeping her safe, about protecting her from those who would harm her." His voice was gentle, almost pleading. It was so unlike the cold manner he usually showed. "And you never learned who the woman was?" Mrs. O'Brien shook her head. "No one spoke of it. The other servants either didn't know or wouldn't say. But there were rumors, whispered conversations that stopped when I entered a room. Some said Mr. Hartwell had gone mad with grief and imagined his dead wife still lived. Others said he kept a mistress hidden away. But none of it felt right to me, detective. There was something sad about the whole business, something tragic." Jonathan thanked her for her honesty and left with his mind racing. A locked room, a crying woman, Hartwell's protective words. The pieces were beginning to form a picture, though it remained frustratingly incomplete. He spent the next 2 days conducting surveillance on the Hartwell mansion, observing the comings and goings of servants, delivery men, and visitors. He noted that supplies were delivered regularly to the servants' entrance, including food in quantities that seemed excessive for one man and his staff. Someone else was being fed, someone whose existence was kept secret. On the 3rd night of his surveillance, as a bitter wind swept down Commonwealth Avenue and snow crunched beneath his boots, Jonathan witnessed something that confirmed his suspicions. Near midnight, when the house had gone dark and the street was deserted, a lamp was lit in the 3rd-floor window. He watched as a silhouette appeared behind the curtain, clearly female, pacing back and forth like a caged animal. Then the figure stopped, pressed close to the window, and her hand appeared against the glass once more. This time she seemed to be writing something, tracing letters with her finger. Jonathan strained his eyes in the darkness, trying to make out the words. When the lamp suddenly extinguished, plunging the window into darkness once more, he had managed to decipher only 3 letters, H-E-L, help. She was asking for help. Jonathan knew he could wait no longer. Whatever was happening in that house, whatever reason Edmund Hartwell had for keeping this woman hidden, it had gone too far. But he also knew he could not simply force his way inside without cause. He needed a legal pretext, something that would allow him to search the premises without overstepping his authority. The solution came from an unexpected source. The following morning, Jonathan received a message at the police station. A woman wished to speak with him about the Hartwell case, though how she knew of his investigation he could not imagine. He was directed to a small tea room on Boylston Street, a respectable establishment frequented by ladies of good society. The woman waiting for him was elderly, perhaps 70 years of age, dressed in expensive black silk with a cameo brooch at her throat. Her silver hair was arranged in an elaborate style, and her blue eyes, though faded with age, held sharp intelligence. She introduced herself as Mrs. Abigail Thornton, and her first words shocked Jonathan to his core. "I know you are investigating my niece's disappearance, Detective Reid," she said quietly, her gloved hands folded on the table before her. "I have waited 2 years for someone to finally take an interest in Eleanor's fate." Jonathan sat down heavily, his mind reeling. Eleanor? Eleanor Hartwell? Eleanor Hayes. Mrs. Thornton corrected gently. "My sister's daughter. 2 years ago she met Edmund Hartwell at a charity function. He was immediately captivated by her. Eleanor was a beautiful girl, kind and gentle, with auburn hair and the most remarkable green eyes. She had lived a sheltered life, having lost both parents to influenza when she was 19. I became her guardian, and we lived quietly together." "What happened?" Jonathan asked, though he was beginning to piece together the terrible truth. Mrs. Thornton's eyes filled with tears. "Edmund courted her with great intensity. He showered her with gifts, promised her the world. Eleanor was flattered by his attention, though she did not return his feelings with the same fervor. She was too innocent, too trusting to see the obsession growing in him. When she finally told him gently that she could not accept his proposal of marriage, that she cared for him only as a friend, he became enraged." She paused, dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. "A week later, Eleanor disappeared. She left the house one evening to attend a concert and never returned. I reported her missing to the police, but they found no trace of her. Her friends were questioned, hospitals were checked, but it was as though she had vanished into thin air. I accused Edmund, told the police he must have taken her, but he claimed innocence and his servants supported his alibi. Without evidence, nothing could be done." "But you believe he has her," Jonathan said, his voice tight with anger. "I know he does," Mrs. Thornton said firmly. "Edmund Hartwell is a man accustomed to getting what he wants. When Eleanor refused him, he could not accept it. I believe he has kept her prisoner these 2 years, perhaps hoping she would eventually surrender to his wishes. But my Eleanor is strong-willed. She would never give in to such tyranny." Jonathan withdrew the 2 red gloves from his coat pocket and laid them on the table. "Did your niece favor the color red?" Mrs. Thornton gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Those are Eleanor's gloves. I recognize them. Edmund gave them to her during his courtship. She accepted them because she did not wish to be rude, but she rarely wore them. She said the color was too bold for her taste. Where did you find them?" "One was discovered in the snow on Beacon Hill 3 nights ago. The other was never collected from the glovemaker who created them." "Mrs. Thornton, I believe your niece deliberately dropped that glove where it would be found. I believe she was hoping someone would trace it back to her, would realize she was still alive." The elderly woman gripped his hand with surprising strength. "Then you must help her, Detective. Please, you must free her from that monster. She is all the family I have left." Jonathan's jaw set with determination. "I give you my word, Mrs. Thornton. I will bring Eleanor home to you. But I need you to do something for me. I need you to file a formal missing person report with my captain, including all the details of Eleanor's disappearance and your suspicions about Hartwell. That will give me the legal authority to search his house." "I tried before," she said bitterly. "No one would listen. They will listen now," Jonathan promised. "I have evidence connecting the gloves to Hartwell, and your testimony establishes motive. It may not be enough to convict him, but it is enough to justify a search warrant." Within 2 hours, Mrs. Thornton had given her statement to Captain Harrison, who had no choice but to acknowledge the validity of her claims. The combination of the gloves, the testimony, and Jonathan's observations gave them sufficient cause. By evening, Jonathan stood before the Hartwell mansion once more, this time with 4 officers and a legal warrant to search the premises. Edmund Hartwell met them at the door, his face pale with fury. "This is outrageous. I will have your badge for this, Reid." "You are welcome to try," Jonathan said coldly, pushing past him into the foyer. "We have reason to believe that Miss Eleanor Hayes is being held in this house against her will. We will search every room until we find her. There is no one here but myself and my servants," Hartwell said, but his voice lacked conviction. Jonathan ignored him and headed directly for the stairs, his heart pounding with anticipation and dread. He climbed to the 3rd floor, the other officers following close behind. There were 6 doors along the hallway, 5 of which stood open. The 6th, at the far end, was locked. "Open this door," Jonathan commanded. "I will not," Hartwell said, having followed them upstairs. "That is my private study. You have no right." Jonathan drew back his foot and kicked the door with all his strength. The lock held. He kicked again and again, until finally the wood splintered and the door crashed inward. The room beyond was furnished like a luxurious prison. A 4-poster bed with silk hangings stood against one wall. Bookshelves lined another. A small table held the remains of a dinner. And standing by the window, her hand still pressed against the glass as though frozen in that gesture of desperate appeal, was Eleanor Hayes. She turned as they entered, and Jonathan saw her face fully for the first time. She was indeed beautiful, with delicate features and that remarkable auburn hair falling loose around her shoulders. But it was her eyes that captured him, those green eyes now filled with hope and disbelief and overwhelming relief. "You found me," she whispered, her voice hoarse from disuse. "The glove. You found the glove." Jonathan crossed the room in 3 strides, fighting the urge to gather her into his arms. "You are safe now, Miss Hayes. I am Detective Jonathan Reid, and I am here to take you home." Eleanor's knees buckled, and Jonathan caught her gently, supporting her weight as 2 years of fear and captivity finally overwhelmed her composure. She wept against his shoulder while behind them, the other officers placed Edmund Hartwell under arrest, his protestations and threats echoing through the mansion. The reunion between Eleanor Hayes and her Aunt Abigail was one of the most moving scenes Jonathan had ever witnessed in his years as a detective. Mrs. Thornton had been waiting at the police station, her hands trembling with anticipation, when Jonathan arrived with Eleanor wrapped in a warm wool coat borrowed from one of the officers. The moment the elderly woman saw her niece, she cried out and rushed forward, and the 2 women embraced with such fierce emotion that everyone present felt tears prick their own eyes. "My darling girl," Mrs. Thornton sobbed, stroking Eleanor's hair as though she were still a child. "I never stopped searching, never stopped believing you were alive. Every day I prayed for your return. I knew you would not abandon me, Aunt Abigail," Eleanor said, her voice breaking. "That knowledge sustained me through the darkest hours, and this detective, this brave man, he understood what the glove meant. He found me when no one else would look." Eleanor turned to Jonathan, who stood respectfully aside and extended her hand. He took it gently, acutely aware of how delicate it felt in his own larger grasp. Even after her ordeal, she maintained a natural grace and dignity that he found profoundly moving. "I owe you my freedom, Detective Reid," she said, her green eyes meeting his with an intensity that made his heart skip. "I do not know how I can ever repay such a debt." "Seeing you safe with your aunt is payment enough," Jonathan replied, though he found himself reluctant to release her hand. "But I will need you to give a formal statement about your captivity. The case against Edmund Hartwell must be built on solid testimony if we are to ensure he faces justice." "I will tell you everything," Eleanor said firmly, a spark of steel entering her voice. "That man stole 2 years of my life. I want him to answer for every day of my imprisonment." Captain Harrison, who had been observing the proceedings with satisfaction, stepped forward. "Miss Hayes, you have been through a terrible ordeal. Perhaps you should rest tonight and give your statement tomorrow when you have had time to recover." But Eleanor shook her head. "No, Captain. If I wait, I fear I will lose my courage. The memories are too fresh, too painful. I would rather speak now, while my resolve is strong, and begin the process of putting this nightmare behind me." Jonathan admired her strength even as he recognized the fragility beneath it. Eleanor had endured 2 years of captivity, 2 years of psychological torment at the hands of a man who claimed to love her. Yet here she stood, ready to face her demons rather than flee from them. It was a courage he had rarely encountered, and it deepened his respect for her immeasurably. They moved to a private room where Eleanor, with her aunt beside her for support, recounted the terrible story of her abduction and imprisonment. Jonathan took notes, though he found it difficult to maintain professional detachment as she spoke. Her voice remained steady, but he could see the cost of each revelation in the tightness around her eyes, the way her hands occasionally trembled before she clasped them together. Edmund had been courting me for 3 months, Eleanor began. At first, his attention was flattering. He was handsome, wealthy, respected in society. My aunt thought he would be a good match. But as time passed, his affection became possessive, almost suffocating. He wanted to control every aspect of my life, dictated what I should wear, whom I should see, how I should spend my time. When I tried to establish boundaries, he would become angry, then apologetic, then angry again. It was exhausting. She paused, accepting a glass of water from her aunt. Finally, I realized I could never marry such a man. I told him as gently as I could that while I valued his friendship, I could not return his romantic feelings. He seemed to accept my decision, even wished me well. I thought the matter was closed. Jonathan's jaw tightened, knowing what came next. A week later, I attended a concert at Symphony Hall with friends. As I was leaving, a carriage pulled alongside me in the darkness. A man stepped out, pressed a cloth soaked in some chemical over my face, and I lost consciousness. When I awoke, I was in that room on the 3rd floor of Edmund's mansion. Mrs. Thornton made a small sound of distress, and Eleanor squeezed her hand reassuringly before continuing. Edmund told me he had brought me there for my own protection, that there were men who wished to harm me because of my inheritance. He said I must stay hidden until the danger passed. I did not believe him, of course. I demanded to be released, threatened to scream for help, but he had soundproofed the room. No one could hear me. He visited me daily, bringing gifts, speaking to me as though we were courting normally. He was always gentle, never physically violent, but his obsession was terrifying. Did he ever force himself upon you? Jonathan asked, though the question pained him to voice. No, Eleanor said, and Jonathan felt relief wash through him. He wanted my willing surrender, my love freely given. He believed that given enough time, enough isolation, I would eventually come to care for him. He could not comprehend that love cannot be manufactured through imprisonment. Each day he would ask if I had reconsidered, if I was ready to accept his proposal. Each day I refused. After a year he stopped asking. He simply continued his visits, speaking to me about his business affairs, the state of the world, as though we were an old married couple sharing our evening conversation. Jonathan felt anger burning in his chest at the calculated cruelty of it. How did you manage to get the glove into the street? For the first time, a small smile touched Eleanor's lips. 6 months ago, Edmund hired a new laundry maid, a young Irish girl named Bridget. She was kind, and I could see the confusion in her eyes when she occasionally caught glimpses of me through the door when Edmund visited. I began leaving notes in the pockets of garments I sent down to be cleaned, hoping she would find them and seek help. But Edmund discovered one of my notes before it reached her, and Bridget was dismissed immediately. The smile faded. I realized I needed a different approach, something that would reach beyond the house without relying on the servants. I remembered the red gloves Edmund had given me early in our courtship. I hated them, never wore them, but I had kept them in a drawer. 3 weeks ago, Edmund left my door unlocked while he went to fetch something from his study. It was the first time in 2 years he had been so careless. I knew I had only moments. Her voice grew stronger, more animated. I grabbed one glove and ran to the window that overlooked the alley. I threw it as hard as I could, praying someone would find it, someone who would recognize its quality and wonder how such a fine thing came to be discarded. I did not know if my gamble would work, but I had to try. Then I returned to my room before Edmund noticed my absence. It was the bravest thing I have ever heard, Jonathan said quietly. That glove led me to you, Miss Hayes. Your courage saved yourself. No, Detective, Eleanor said, meeting his eyes with profound gratitude. Your determination saved me. Another man might have dismissed a single glove as meaningless. You looked deeper. You asked questions. You refused to accept easy answers. You are the reason I am free. The statement took hours to complete, and by the time Eleanor had recounted every detail of her captivity, night had fallen once again. Mrs. Thornton insisted that Jonathan accompany them back to her home on Mount Vernon Street, where Eleanor would be staying during her recovery. You must allow me to offer you dinner at the very least, the elderly woman said. It is the least I can do to thank you properly. Jonathan accepted, telling himself it was simply good practice to ensure Eleanor's safety until Hartwell was formally charged. But truthfully, he was reluctant to leave Eleanor's presence. Something had awakened in him during this investigation, something that went far beyond professional duty. He found himself wanting to know everything about her, wanting to be near her, wanting to ensure that no harm ever came to her again. The Thornton house was elegant but warm, filled with comfortable furniture and family portraits. Mrs. Thornton's housekeeper, a motherly woman named Mrs. Davies, fussed over Eleanor, bringing her hot tea and warm blankets. Jonathan sat in the parlor, watching as the two women who loved Eleanor worked to restore some normalcy to her world. Over dinner, served on fine china in a dining room lit by candles, Eleanor began to relax. Color returned to her pale cheeks, and occasionally Jonathan glimpsed the woman she must have been before her captivity, vibrant and full of life. She asked him about his work, about his life, with genuine interest that touched him deeply. "Have you always been a detective?" she asked as Mrs. Davies cleared their plates. "No," Jonathan replied. "I studied law at Harvard, intended to become an attorney. But during my final year, a close friend was murdered, and the police seemed unable to solve the case. I became involved in the investigation, discovered I had a talent for piecing together evidence and uncovering truth. When the killer was finally brought to justice, I realized that detective work was my true calling. I joined the Boston Police Department 6 years ago." "And have you family here in Boston?" Eleanor asked, then blushed slightly. "Forgive me, I do not mean to pry. 2 years of isolation have left me starved for normal conversation." Jonathan smiled, finding her embarrassment charming. "You are not prying. I am happy to answer. My parents live in Philadelphia. I have one sister, married and living in New York. I see them when my work permits, though not as often as I should." "And have you never thought to marry?" Mrs. Thornton asked with the bluntness of age. "Aunt Abigail," Eleanor protested, clearly mortified. But Jonathan did not mind the question. "I have been too focused on my career, I suppose. Detective work demands long hours and complete dedication. It hardly seems fair to ask a woman to accept such an arrangement." "The right woman would understand," Mrs. Thornton said knowingly. "The right woman would value your dedication to justice and truth." Eleanor looked down at her plate, but Jonathan noticed the faint smile that curved her lips. As the evening drew to a close and Jonathan prepared to take his leave, Eleanor walked with him to the front door. In the dim light of the hallway, away from her aunt's watchful eyes, she seemed suddenly vulnerable again, the brave facade slipping to reveal the frightened woman beneath. "Detective Reid," she said softly. "Will Edmund truly be punished for what he did, or will his wealth and influence allow him to escape justice?" Jonathan took her hand, holding it gently between both of his own. "I give you my word, Miss Hayes. Edmund Hartwell will face trial for your abduction and unlawful imprisonment. I will work tirelessly to ensure he cannot harm you again." "I believe you," Eleanor said, and the trust in her eyes moved him profoundly. "You are a man of honor, detective. I recognized at the moment I saw you breaking down that door to free me. I do not know what the future holds, but I am grateful beyond measure that you came into my life, even under such terrible circumstances." "The gratitude is mine," Jonathan said, meaning it with his whole heart. "You have reminded me why I became a detective, why this work matters. You have shown me courage and strength that humble me." They stood there for a moment longer, hands joined, something unspoken passing between them. Then Eleanor withdrew her hand gently and stepped back. "Good night, Detective Reid. I hope we shall see each other again soon." "That is my hope as well, Miss Hayes. Sleep peacefully tonight. You are safe now." As Jonathan walked back through the snowy streets toward his apartment, his mind was filled not with thoughts of the case but with images of Eleanor, her green eyes, her courageous spirit, the way she had smiled at him across the dinner table. He recognized the dangerous territory his feelings were entering. Eleanor was vulnerable, traumatized, hardly in a position to form new attachments. Yet he could not deny the connection he felt, the sense that meeting her had altered something fundamental within him. The following weeks were consumed with building the case against Edmund Hartwell. Jonathan worked with the district attorney's office, gathering evidence, interviewing witnesses, ensuring that every aspect of the prosecution was solid. Hartwell had hired the best lawyers money could buy, men who argued that Eleanor had come to his house willingly, that she had been free to leave at any time. They painted her as a woman scorned, seeking revenge against a man who had rejected her. But Jonathan's meticulous work prevailed. He found the men Hartwell had hired to abduct Eleanor, men who, when faced with their own prison sentences, testified against their employer. He located the doctor who had provided the chloroform used to render Eleanor unconscious. He documented every lock on Eleanor's door, every soundproofing modification Hartwell had made to that third-floor room. Throughout the investigation, Jonathan found himself visiting the Thornton house frequently, ostensibly to update Eleanor on the case's progress, but truthfully because he could not stay away. Each visit revealed new facets of her character. She was intelligent, well-read, with strong opinions on literature and social reform. She had a gift for watercolor painting and would often show him her latest works, landscapes mostly, rendered in delicate washes of color. She played piano beautifully, and sometimes in the evenings he would sit in the parlor and listen to her perform Chopin or Mozart with such feeling that it moved him to tears. As winter gave way to spring, and the snows of Boston melted into rushing streams that filled the gutters and brought the first green shoots to the common, Jonathan realized that his feelings for Eleanor had grown beyond admiration into something far deeper and more profound. He found himself thinking of her at odd moments throughout the day, remembering the way her eyes lit up when she laughed, the gentle grace of her movements, the thoughtful way she listened when he spoke about his work. He had never believed in love at first sight, had always considered such notions the province of romantic novels rather than real life. Yet he could not deny that from the moment he had seen her face in that window, something within him had recognized her as essential to his happiness. The question was whether Eleanor could return such feelings. She had been through tremendous trauma, and Jonathan was acutely aware that gratitude could easily be mistaken for affection. He would not take advantage of her vulnerability, would not press his suit until he was certain she had fully recovered from her ordeal. Yet sometimes, when their eyes met across Mrs. Thornton's parlor, or when their hands accidentally touched as he helped her with her coat, he thought he glimpsed something in her expression that gave him hope. The trial of Edmund Hartwell began on a cool April morning, with crowds gathering outside the courthouse to witness what the newspapers had dubbed the most sensational case of the decade. Jonathan sat in the gallery, his eyes fixed on Eleanor as she took the witness stand. She wore a modest blue dress that brought out the color of her eyes, and though he could see her hands trembling slightly as she was sworn in, her voice remained steady as she recounted her ordeal. Hartwell's lawyers were merciless in their cross-examination, trying to shake her testimony, to paint her as a willing participant in what they termed a romantic liaison. But Eleanor refused to be intimidated. She met their questions with calm, clear answers, never wavering from the truth. Jonathan felt fierce pride watching her, this woman who had survived 2 years of imprisonment and emerged with her spirit unbroken. "Miss Hayes," the defense attorney said, his tone dripping with false sympathy, "is it not true that you accepted expensive gifts from Mr. Hartwell during his courtship? That you allowed him to escort you to various social functions?" "I accepted his courtship in good faith," Eleanor replied firmly, "as any young woman might when presented with what appeared to be honorable intentions. I ended that courtship when I realized we would not suit. That should have been the conclusion of the matter. Yet you claim Mr. Hartwell abducted you simply because you refused his proposal? Does that not seem rather dramatic?" Eleanor's eyes flashed with anger, the first real emotion she had shown since taking the stand. "What seems dramatic, sir, is that I spent 2 years locked in a room, denied my freedom, cut off from everyone I loved, because a man could not accept rejection. That is not romance. That is obsession. That is imprisonment. And no amount of wealth or social standing excuses such cruelty." The courtroom erupted in murmurs, and the judge had to call for order. Jonathan saw several jury members nodding in agreement with Eleanor's words, and he felt the first stirrings of certainty that justice would prevail. When it came time for Edmund Hartwell himself to testify, Jonathan watched the man carefully. Hartwell maintained his composure, insisting that Eleanor had come to his house willingly, that she had been free to leave at any time. But under the prosecutor's skilled questioning, cracks began to appear in his story. He could not explain the locks on Eleanor's door, the soundproofing, the testimony of servants who had been dismissed for asking questions about the mysterious woman on the third floor. "Mr. Hartwell," the prosecutor said, holding up the red gloves that had started this entire investigation, "why did you commission these gloves if not as a gift for Miss Hayes?" "I do not recall commissioning any gloves," Hartwell said stiffly. "Yet Monsieur Dubois has testified under oath that you did so, that you specified every detail, that you insisted they be perfect for someone very special. Were you lying to him, or are you lying to this court?" Hartwell's face reddened with anger. "I loved Eleanor. Is that a crime? I wanted only to protect her, to give her a life of comfort and security. By imprisoning her against her will," the prosecutor pressed. "By denying her contact with her family? By refusing to accept her clearly stated desire to end your relationship? That is not love, Mr. Hartwell. That is possession." The trial lasted 3 weeks, and throughout those weeks Jonathan remained a constant presence in Eleanor's life. He accompanied her to court each day, sat beside her during the most difficult testimony, offered silent support when words seemed inadequate. Mrs. Thornton, observing them together, smiled knowingly, but said nothing, allowing the relationship to develop at its own pace. On the evening before the jury was to begin deliberations, Eleanor asked Jonathan to walk with her through the Boston Public Garden. Spring had fully arrived, and the trees were clothed in new leaves, their branches swaying gently in the warm breeze. Tulips bloomed in riotous colors along the pathways, and the lagoon reflected the golden light of the setting sun. They walked in comfortable silence for a time, both lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Eleanor spoke, her voice soft but clear. "Whatever the jury decides tomorrow, I want you to know that you have given me back my life, Jonathan. Not just by freeing me from that room, but by showing me that there are still good men in this world, men of honor and integrity, who fight for justice not for glory, but because it is right." It was the first time she had called him by his given name, and the sound of it on her lips sent warmth spreading through his chest. "You give me too much credit, Eleanor. You saved yourself by dropping that glove. I merely followed the trail you left." She stopped walking and turned to face him, her green eyes searching his. "Do you truly believe that is all you did? Do you not understand what your faith in me has meant? When no one else would look for me, when the police dismissed my aunt's concerns, you believed. You saw that glove and refused to accept the easy explanation. You fought for me when you had no obligation to do so. That is not merely doing your duty as a detective. That is kindness. That is caring. That is something far more precious." Jonathan's heart hammered in his chest. They stood beneath a willow tree, its cascading branches creating a curtain of privacy around them. The moment felt suspended in time, weighted with possibility and hope. "Eleanor," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I must speak plainly, though I fear my words may be unwelcome. From the moment I saw you in that window, I have been unable to think of anything but your welfare, your happiness. These past months, knowing you, witnessing your courage and strength, have shown me what has been missing from my life. I have come to care for you deeply, more deeply than I have ever cared for anyone. But I know the timing is terrible, that you have been through an ordeal that would break most people, that the last thing you need is another man making demands on your affection." He took a breath, forcing himself to continue. "So I will not press you, will not ask for anything you are not ready to give. I only want you to know that when you are ready, if you are ever ready, I will be here, waiting, hoping, praying that you might someday see me not as the detective who rescued you, but as a man worthy of your regard." Tears glistened in Eleanor's eyes, but she was smiling, a radiant expression that transformed her entire face. "Oh, Jonathan, do you not understand? I have been hoping for weeks that you would speak these words. I have been terrified that you saw me only as a victim to be pitied, a case to be solved. I never dared imagine that you might feel for me what I have come to feel for you." Jonathan's breath caught in his throat. "What do you feel, Eleanor?" She stepped closer, so close he could smell the faint lavender scent of her perfume, could see the gold flecks in her green eyes. "I feel that you are the finest man I have ever known. I feel that your kindness, your dedication, your gentle strength have shown me what true affection looks like. Edmund claimed to love me, but his love was selfish, possessive, destructive. Yours is generous, patient, and asks nothing in return. That is the kind of love I want in my life. That is the kind of man I want beside me." "Are you certain?" Jonathan asked, hardly daring to believe what he was hearing. "I would not have you confuse gratitude with deeper feelings." Eleanor reached up and placed her hand against his cheek, her touch feather-light and infinitely precious. "I am more certain of this than I have been of anything in my life. Yes, you saved me, and I will always be grateful. But gratitude is not what makes my heart race when you enter a room. Gratitude is not what makes me watch the clock each afternoon. hoping you will visit. Gratitude is not what makes me dream of a future where I wake each morning to see your face beside mine." Jonathan covered her hand with his own, turning his head to press a kiss to her palm. "Eleanor, my darling Eleanor, you have given me a gift beyond price. You have given me hope for a future I had stopped believing was possible." "Then we have given each other the same gift," Eleanor whispered. "For you have restored my faith in love, in the goodness of human hearts. 2 years ago, Edmund tried to break my spirit, to force me to accept a life I did not want. He failed. But in failing, he led me to you, to this moment, to the discovery that true love cannot be manufactured or compelled. It can only be freely offered and freely accepted." Jonathan drew her gently into his arms, mindful of her fragility, her recent trauma. But Eleanor pressed close to him with surprising strength, her head resting against his chest, her arms encircling his waist. They stood like that for long minutes, holding each other beneath the willow tree, while the sun set in a blaze of orange and gold, painting the sky with the colors of new beginnings. "Will you marry me, Eleanor?" Jonathan asked softly. "Not now, not until you are ready, but someday. Will you allow me to spend my life ensuring that you never know fear or sorrow again?" Eleanor lifted her head to look at him, her face glowing with joy. "Yes, Jonathan. Yes, I will marry you." "And you need not wait long for your answer. I have already lost 2 years of my life. I do not wish to waste another moment in hesitation or doubt. When this trial is over, when Edmund Hartwell is behind bars where he belongs, I want to begin our life together." Jonathan's response was to lower his head and kiss her, gently at first, then with growing passion as she responded in kind. It was a kiss that sealed a promise, that spoke of devotion and desire, and the profound rightness of two souls finding each other against impossible odds. The next day, the jury returned after only 4 hours of deliberation. Their verdict was unanimous: guilty on all charges. Edmund Hartwell was sentenced to 20 years in prison for abduction, unlawful imprisonment, and a host of related crimes. As the sentence was read, Jonathan watched the man's face crumble, the carefully maintained facade of respectability finally shattering to reveal the desperate obsession beneath. Hartwell looked across the courtroom at Eleanor, his eyes filled with a toxic mixture of love and hatred. But Eleanor did not flinch. She met his gaze steadily, then deliberately turned away, her hand finding Jonathan's and squeezing it tightly. Justice had been served, and Eleanor was finally, truly free. The wedding took place 3 months later, on a perfect June morning when the sun shone brilliantly and the air smelled of roses and possibility. Mrs. Thornton wept happy tears as she watched her niece, radiant in ivory silk and lace, exchange vows with the man who had saved her life and won her heart. The ceremony was small, attended only by close friends and family, but the joy that filled the small church was immense. As Jonathan slipped a gold band onto Eleanor's finger and promised to love and cherish her for all his days, he reflected on the strange path that had brought them to this moment. A single red glove in the snow, a mystery that had seemed insignificant at first, had led him to the greatest treasure of his life. He had solved countless cases during his career as a detective, had brought numerous criminals to justice, but none of those victories compared to the profound satisfaction of knowing he had found his soulmate, his partner, his love. Eleanor's eyes shone with tears of happiness as she made her own vows, promising to stand beside Jonathan through all the days of their lives, to support his work and share his burdens, to build a future together based on trust, respect, and the deepest affection. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, and Jonathan kissed his bride before God and their gathered loved ones, he knew with absolute certainty that he was the most fortunate man alive. They honeymooned in the Berkshire Mountains, spending 2 blissful weeks in a country inn, surrounded by rolling hills and pristine forests. There, far from the city and its memories, Eleanor truly began to heal. Jonathan watched the last shadows fade from her eyes, saw her laugh with genuine abandon, witnessed her embrace life with an enthusiasm that had been stolen from her but was now restored. "I used to paint landscapes from imagination," Eleanor told him one afternoon as they sat together on the inn's porch, watching clouds drift lazily across a brilliant blue sky. "During my captivity, I would close my eyes and try to remember what freedom looked like. But my paintings were pale imitations, lifeless. Now everything seems more vivid, more beautiful than I ever remembered. The colors are richer, the light more golden. It is as though I am seeing the world for the first time. You are seeing it with new eyes, Jonathan said, his arm around her shoulders. Eyes that have known darkness and emerged into light. That makes every sight more precious. And I am seeing it with you beside me, Eleanor added, turning to kiss him softly. That makes all the difference. When they returned to Boston, they settled into a comfortable home on Marlborough Street, a brick townhouse with large windows that let in abundant light for Eleanor's painting studio. Jonathan continued his work as a detective, but he found a new balance between his professional obligations and his personal life. Eleanor encouraged his work, never complained about his long hours, and took genuine interest in his cases. In turn, he made certain to reserve time for her, to walk with her through the common, to attend concerts and art exhibitions, to simply sit together in the evenings and talk about their days. Mrs. Thornton was a frequent visitor, delighting in her niece's happiness and approving wholeheartedly of her choice of husband. "You have made her whole again," she told Jonathan one afternoon when Eleanor had stepped out to confer with their cook about dinner. "I watched her fade during those months after her disappearance, watched hope die in my own heart, but you brought her back to life. You gave us both a future worth living. She has done the same for me," Jonathan replied honestly. "Before Eleanor, I lived for my work alone. Now I understand what it means to truly live, to have someone to share both triumphs and sorrows with. She is my greatest blessing." As autumn painted the trees in shades of amber and scarlet, Eleanor discovered she was with child. The news filled them both with joy, tempered by Eleanor's understandable nervousness. But Jonathan was there for every moment of her pregnancy, holding her hand through morning sickness, rubbing her swollen feet in the evenings, reading to her from her favorite novels when she felt too tired to do anything but rest. Their daughter was born the following spring, a healthy infant with her mother's green eyes and her father's dark hair. They named her Abigail Eleanor Reid, in honor of the aunt who had never stopped searching and the mother who had never stopped hoping. As Jonathan held his daughter for the first time, Eleanor beside him in their bed, exhausted but radiant with joy, he felt his heart expand to encompass yet another person he would protect and cherish with every breath in his body. "She is perfect," Eleanor whispered, stroking the baby's soft cheek. "Jonathan, look what we have created together. Look at this beautiful new life that came from our love." "She is a miracle," Jonathan agreed, his voice thick with emotion. "Just as you are a miracle, Eleanor. Just as our life together is a miracle born from darkness into light." Years passed, happy years filled with love and laughter, and the ordinary joys of family life. Jonathan continued to solve cases, building an impressive reputation that eventually led to his promotion to chief detective. Eleanor's paintings gained recognition in Boston's art circles, and she held several successful exhibitions. Little Abigail grew into a bright-spirited child who adored both her parents and her great-aunt, who spoiled her shamelessly. On winter evenings, when snow fell softly outside their windows and the fire crackled merrily in the hearth, Jonathan would sometimes take down the glass case that held 2 red gloves, preserved carefully as a reminder of how their story had begun. He would tell Abigail about her mother's courage, about a single glove dropped from a window that had changed 2 lives forever. "Mama was very brave," Abigail would say, looking up at her mother with adoration. "Yes, she was," Jonathan would agree. "And she still is. Every day, she shows me what true courage looks like." Eleanor would smile and pull them both close, her arms around her husband and daughter, her heart full of gratitude for the life she had been given. The nightmare of her captivity had faded into memory, a shadow that no longer had power to hurt her. In its place stood this beautiful reality, this family built on love and trust and the unshakable knowledge that they belonged together. And sometimes, late at night when the house was quiet and they lay together in the darkness, Jonathan would hold Eleanor close and thank whatever providence had led him to notice a red glove in the snow, to see significance where others saw only accident, to follow a trail that had led him not just to solve a mystery, but to find the other half of his soul. "I love you," he would whisper into her hair. "And I love you," Eleanor would respond, her hand finding his in the darkness. "Today, tomorrow, and always. You are my hero, my partner, my dearest friend. You are everything I never dared hope for, and everything I will ever need." And in that quiet moment, in the safety of each other's arms, They would both know that they had found what so many search for but few discover. A love strong enough to overcome any obstacle, deep enough to weather any storm, and true enough to last a lifetime and beyond. The red glove that had brought them together remained in its case, a silent witness to the power of hope, the importance of perseverance, and the truth that sometimes the smallest clues can lead to the greatest treasures. It had been a symbol of desperation, a cry for help from a woman no one believed existed. But it had become something more, a reminder that love can emerge from darkness, that courage can triumph over cruelty, and that two souls meant to be together will always find their way to each other, no matter how impossible the odds. Their story, which had begun with mystery and fear, had transformed into a tale of hope, redemption, and enduring love. And as they built their life together, day by precious day, they proved that the happiest endings are not found in fairy tales, but in the courage to believe in love even when all seems lost, and in the willingness to fight for that love with every breath and every heartbeat. In the end, the red glove in the snow had led Detective Jonathan Reid to more than just a woman no one believed existed. It had led him to his destiny, to his greatest case and his greatest love, to a future bright with promise and a heart finally, completely, home.